something very serious has been happening in France for the past few days. It's insidious, it doesn't make the evening news headlines, but it's a worrying indicator of the future that's being prepared for us. The boundaries of our freedoms are being shifted millimeter by millimeter toward an authoritarianism that doesn't speak its name. All of this is done under the guise of security, and this week the boundaries have shifted again. For the first time, a globally respected open-source mobile operating system, audited by experts, has been officially presented as a tool for drug traffickers. That system is GrapheneOS. For the first time, a national newspaper and a judicial authority have chosen to present an open-source, audited, and respected digital security tool as an instrument of crime. GrapheneOS was not analyzed, criticized, or debated. No, it was singled out, and in politics as in law, being singled out is never an accident. Because it's important to understand what happened. This isn't just an article, it's a signal sent to citizens, a warning. The choice of a narrative that says wanting to protect yourself is suspicious. To encrypt is to conceal. Strengthening your phone must mean you have something to hide. This is the new consensus dreamed up by those who deep down would like our digital privacy to no longer belong to us. We're not talking about some obscure system hidden away in a clandestine forum. We're talking about a project recognized by experts, used by journalists, researchers, NGOs, by people whose only fault is refusing to let their private lives be exposed to any powerful actor who comes along. But in just a few hours, the narrative shifted. What once protected now becomes what threatens. What once strengthened your rights now becomes what hinders the state. What once secured your phone now becomes what helps traffickers. This offensive reveals something deeper. Those in power can no longer stand the idea of a digital space where they don't have control. It's not crime that worries them, it's the very existence of a private space, a space that escapes, a space that resists. GrapheneOS is just the tree, the real issue is the forest. Our right to a private sphere that neither the state, nor the platforms, nor cybercriminals can violate at will. So the real question isn't who wants to take down GrapheneOS, the real question is what does this case reveal about the future that's being prepared for us? And how far are we willing to let a country slide toward a model where simply wanting to protect oneself becomes a suspicious act? GrapheneOS is an alternative operating system for smartphones like Android or iOS. It's based on the foundations of Android, but in a completely reworked, free and open source version that anyone can audit and which is designed to strengthen user privacy and security. It only works on a single family of phones, the Google Pixel, simply because these are currently the only models that offer a hardware base solid enough for this level of protection to be credible. You can download and install it for free. It's extremely simple. GrapheneOS has the unique feature of securing your device in a very concrete way. It hardens the system kernel, strengthens the isolation between applications, makes permissions much stricter, encrypts all your data, and by default disables Google services that collect information about your usage. In short, each application is locked in its own box, your data is encrypted, and nothing leaves your device unless you decide so. That's what it means to have control over your phone. And this work, this rigor, this high standard hasn't been funded by a government, a multinational corporation, or by some side product sold under the table. GrapheneOS is a non-profit foundation based in Canada and created by a team of experienced developers who have managed to make an operating system that is extremely difficult to attack. There is no fundraising, no marketing plan, no monetization, no commercialization. It's a project funded by donations, a few technical partnerships, and a conviction that a world where privacy disappears is a world that falls apart. I myself have dedicated 2 videos to the phone that the police can't unlock, basing them on internal documents from forensic companies like Cellebrite, which sell government solutions to break into locked devices and access their contents. And the reason I made this editorial choice is because only government agencies can afford the latest cutting-edge technologies designed to break a phone's security. So it's a valuable indicator for understanding the reliability and resilience of an operating system against all threats, without exception. And today, one point is clearly causing discomfort. Among consumer devices, Google Pixels running GrapheneOS are among the only ones to consistently and reproducibly put up real resistance to forced unlocking attempts. This isn't an anomaly, it's what should be the standard. And that's precisely what some are trying to portray as a threat. So, this whole story started with the first article by Julien Constant in Le Parisien, whose aim wasn't to inform, but to stage an event with a headline that already says a lot: the secret weapon of drug traffickers. The government's message, relayed by Le Parisien, is GrapheneOS is not a technological tool, it's a threat. It's not an operating system, but a symbol of criminality that is constantly trying to evade justice. And this rhetoric is as old as the world itself. A group is chosen, in this case drug traffickers, it's associated with a technology, and the public is left to make the mental leap. And it's effective, it's sensationalist, and above all, it's intellectually dishonest. All the more so because the journalist relies on an intelligence memo dated November 7th, 2025, confidential mind you, which was shared with Le Parisien and comes from the judicial police, who lament the inability of law enforcement to access the contents of phones running GrapheneOS. And let me tell you, an intelligence memo from the judicial police is to intelligence what McDonald's is to French cuisine. In the article from Le Parisien, we learn that a suspect in a drug case, a certain Omar, was reportedly apprehended with a pixel running GrapheneOS, and that when investigators tried to access the phone, it supposedly reset itself mysteriously, erasing all its data, mysteriously. As if the phone had acted on its own. Well, nothing magical happened. There's nothing supernatural about any of this. It's simply what's called a duress code, a second code, different from the usual unlock code, that erases the data when entered under threat or in a coercive situation. This mechanism isn't a gadget for traffickers. It's a protection tool designed to deal with assault, extortion, kidnapping, domestic violence, industrial espionage, or yes, potentially abusive coercion. You can't sell the public tools that protect against criminals and, in the same breath, demand that they stop protecting as soon as it inconveniences the police. Security isn't something that changes depending on the situation. And in this case, it's clear that the suspect deliberately gave investigators the duress code, passing it off as the unlock code. He was the one who triggered the deletion. It wasn't GrapheneOS, it wasn't a virus, it wasn't a fake Snapchat. It was him, period. That's all. But instead of explaining that, the journalist prefers to make a lazy and sensationalist comparison with Encryption and Sky ECC. Those encrypted phones, sold at a high price and designed exclusively for criminal activities. Those tools, yes, were tools of organized crime and were sold as such. That's not a minor detail, it's a lucrative business. They were caught because they were specifically a commercial platform dedicated to traffickers, not an open source project freely accessible to anyone in the world. That has absolutely nothing to do with it. So, persisting in its desire to paint an alarming picture, the article specifies that you can get GrapheneOS on the darknet. I'm telling you friends, never try to get an operating system from the darknet. That's the best way to end up with malware. The one and only way to install GrapheneOS is through their official website, which is accessible to everyone with a simple search engine. So saying you can find it on the darknet, sure, it adds sensationalism, it scares the average person, but it's factually ridiculous. All you'll find there are modified copies from who knows where, and no one, absolutely no one serious or sensible in cybersecurity would ever go looking for GrapheneOS on the infamous darknet, somewhere between organs and a Kalashnikov. So, off to a good start, right? Julian Constant goes on to explain that the software can display a fake Snapchat page to fool investigators while it erases itself. From a technical standpoint, that statement is complete nonsense. There is no such native feature in the official version of GrapheneOS. But since it's open source software, anyone can modify it and create their own exotic version. But attributing these modifications to the official project is pure and simple disinformation. And to wrap up with this article, which, as you've clearly understood, is anything but nuanced, it cites an anonymous police source claiming that the presence of this system on a phone is a clear indicator of sophistication and intent to conceal. There is absolutely no intent to conceal here. It's just an investigator who's frustrated because he's facing a tool that resists his methods. It's all the more hypocritical since the latest iPhones, which are completely mainstream, pose similar problems for investigators thanks to their encryption management. And yet, no one says that buying an iPhone is an act of criminal concealment. Oh right, suddenly people are a bit more hesitant to go after Apple than a small Canadian open source project. We're constantly lectured because our devices aren't patched, because we use lousy passwords, because we still make calls on vulnerable Android phones. And the day we do things right, take security seriously, install a robust OS, suddenly we become suspects. At some point, you're going to have to pick a side. Either we want citizens to protect themselves, or we want them to stay vulnerable to make the police's job easier. But you can't blame both at the same time. GrapheneOS, probably tired of so many misconceptions, responded quite appropriately. Criminals also use fast cars, knives, and cash. These are tools used by everyone, yet we don't ban the sale of kitchen knives on the grounds that they could be used for something other than cutting tomatoes. Well, obviously the first article wasn't enough. On the same day, two hours apart, Julian Constant does it again in a perfectly coordinated interview with Joanna Bruce, deputy prosecutor in Paris, head of the fight against cybercrime, the specialist in the dark web and hackers. So, you might expect some in-depth expertise, but here's what you can read about phones running GrapheneOS. These devices protect communications and don't share data on servers. Alright, let's pause and take a breath. GrapheneOS is an operating system, not a messaging app. Take another breath, I'll repeat, it's an operating system, not a messaging service. When you use your phone, your data doesn't go to GrapheneOS servers simply because there aren't any. Your data stays on your phone, okay? And to make it even simpler for those in the back of the class, you have an Android phone, you open Le Parisien if you feel like it. What happens? Your app contacts Le Parisien's servers to display the article on your phone. The OS itself doesn't store anything on its own servers because they don't exist. The magistrate then goes on to say that she acknowledges there's some legitimacy in wanting to protect one's communications before adding, well, a threat, but that won't stop us from prosecuting publishers if any links are found with a criminal organization or with someone who doesn't cooperate. The word has been spoken, cooperate. Coming from a magistrate when talking about an encryption tool, cooperate means handing over the keys. It means installing a backdoor. It means demanding to break the security of the system for everyone, making 400,000 users vulnerable just because a handful of criminals use the same tools as they do. And she concludes with a sentence that sounds like a challenge. Nothing is unbreakable. So it's rather ironic, isn't it, to end on that note, because if nothing were unbreakable, Madam Prosecutor, you wouldn't be complaining in the press that you can't access the contents of these phones. The reaction was not long in coming. While Le Parisien and the deputy prosecutor calmly spin their anxiety-inducing story, GrapheneOS, for its part, takes the hit, then literally explodes. Usually, it's a rather austere project, almost cold in its communication, but this time, the tone changes abruptly. On social media, the team posts a series of messages that leave no doubt about what they think of how things are unfolding. I'm quoting their words here, not the watered-down version. They talk about a country becoming increasingly authoritarian, where fascist law enforcement spreads outrageous and false allegations about open-source projects. For them, this isn't just a botched article or a slip-up. They see it as a political offensive against encryption, a deliberate shift toward a surveillance model where the state can no longer tolerate effective tools resisting its control. And they're not just using words, they act very quickly. GrapheneOS announces that it is cutting off anything that directly or indirectly falls under French jurisdiction. We no longer have any active servers in France, they write. It's immediate. The servers hosted at OVH that supported their download mirror and part of the community infrastructure have been shut down. Logically, it's simple. As long as part of their infrastructure depends on French law, there is a risk. In response, OVH retorts that nothing has happened, that no requisition has taken place. But GrapheneOS isn't talking about the past, it's talking about the risk. OVH is a French company, so it's subject to French law, including for its data centers abroad. And as long as any part of their architecture depends on this jurisdiction, there is a possibility of direct access, as was the case with Encrochat. So they do what anyone publicly targeted by a magistrate would do. They cut ties before anything happens. They will also change all their cryptographic keys and advise their developers to physically avoid France. When you're a security engineer, an open source maintainer, a developer, and you read in the press that a deputy prosecutor reserves the right to prosecute publishers who don't cooperate with the justice system, you start to think carefully about where you want to set foot. They've made their decision. France is no longer a country where they feel safe. Along the way, they settle scores with what they call the fake French privacy OSs. They specifically name EOS, meaning the Murena project, and judicial, accusing them of selling systems with extraordinarily poor privacy, lagging behind on patches, encouraging users to unlock the bootloader, and exposing them, all while wrapping themselves in privacy rhetoric. They also point out that these projects have received public funding, while they, as volunteer projects, find themselves pilloried. In several messages, they state clearly, France is no longer a safe country for open source projects focused on privacy. And it's staggering when you think about it. Because, first, one of the most respected mobile operating systems in the world, recommended by figures like Edward Snowden and used by NGOs, journalists, and human rights defenders, now officially classifies France as a hostile jurisdiction. Not just a deep disagreement, but hostile. And in the midst of all this, France is sending out other completely contradictory signals. On one hand, according to GrapheneOS itself, the ANSSI, the French National Cybersecurity Agency, has actively used the system, audited its code, reported very specific bugs, and suggested protections to be integrated. In other words, state experts know perfectly well that this is neither a narco gadget nor a conspiracy theorist's toy. It's a serious security tool that they themselves have used and tested. On the other hand, those same institutions allow the idea to spread in the media that GrapheneOS is the secret weapon of organized crime. The issue goes far beyond just GrapheneOS. Because when a project like this, respected worldwide, states in black and white that France is becoming increasingly authoritarian and is no longer a safe country for open source projects focused on privacy, it's not just a technical dispute, it's a political diagnosis. And whether we like it or not, this diagnosis is starting to be heard far beyond our borders. We need to look at this story for what it really is. Not just a technical conflict, but an ideological shift. A subtle, gradual way of turning individual protection into suspicion, personal security into an anomaly, and encryption into a moral offense. A political shift where the state begins to consider that anything it cannot open is by default suspect. This is exactly what the writer François Sureau describes when he writes that the temptation to sacrifice freedom in the name of security is the natural slope of weary democracies. And he adds, in a crucial phrase for understanding this moment, a society that gives in to fear never gains security, but it does lose freedom. The question that arises here is a basic one. Do we still have the right to use our devices, our data, our digital tools as we see fit? Or are we going to accept that this right is conditional, interpreted, monitored, tolerated only as long as it does not interfere with the security apparatus? It is our right to choose our operating system, our right to encrypt our communications, our right to limit the data we share, our right to protect our exchanges, our work, our private lives. These rights are not privileges granted by the state. They predate it. They stem from individual sovereignty. They are the very foundation of a free society. And yet, in this case, we see the opposite logic taking shape. A citizen who secures their phone becomes sophisticated. A tool that protects becomes an intention to conceal. A legitimate technical barrier becomes an obstacle to be bypassed. An open source OS becomes the smartphone of drug traffickers. This is how abuses begin, by reversing the burden of proof, by implying that freedom is dangerous because it escapes control, by suggesting that each person's security suddenly threatens everyone's security. It is the shadow cast by an ideology that moves in disguise, one that claims the state has a natural right to access any information, any device, any data, as soon as it deems it necessary. The one that sees privacy as an obstacle, a luxury, a whim, an operational inconvenience. The one that considers a protected citizen to be a potentially guilty citizen. But it is precisely to prevent this that our constitutions, our laws, our intellectual traditions have built safeguards. So yes, this issue goes beyond GrapheneOS, but at its core, it speaks about us, about the space we are willing to give the state in our digital lives, about what we are prepared to give up in the name of a security that, year after year, keeps demanding more room, about our ability to say no, to say stop. If you believe that privacy is not something to be negotiated, if you believe that individual security is not a crime, then I truly encourage you to support GrapheneOS by making a donation to the foundation. The link is in the description. And above all, let's stay vigilant, because abuses never happen all at once. They happen when we stop paying attention, when we grow tired. In a democracy, freedom always comes before security, never the other way around.